years old. I was in middle school, 6th grade. I was pretty small at that point, and I had a penchant for being a smartass because it was my defense mechanism. And I remember I was hanging out with a group of boys, my friends, and I was being a smartass, and I was joking around and teasing, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, the school bully, an 8th grader, walked up to me and just sucker punched me in the stomach. I still to this day don't know why. But what it did to me is it knocked the wind out of me, and I started to cry. And I can tell you, if there's one thing you do not want to do as a 6th grade boy, is cry in front of your friends. And I knew that at the age of 11. Now, a couple things happened to me in that moment. It changed some of my world beliefs. In that instant, my world went immediately from the world's a relatively safe place to the world is a dangerous place. It went from a playground to a battleground. It also meant that people could randomly come up and just punch me for no apparent reason. But I think even more importantly is I realized that I hated my emotions. And if I had the option of just ripping them out of me and leaving them in the gutter, I gladly would have done that. I think at that point in my life, Mr. Spock was my hero. I didn't realize that emotions had a purpose. And that's kind of how we learn what it is to be a man. And if there's been people in the past, and I think this started in Oakland, California with Paul Kivel, where he asked hundreds of men and young men in high school, what does it mean to you to be a man? And there's a lot of common answers, a lot of themes. And we pick these rules up in a variety of ways. Sometimes they're from our fathers, not always. Sometimes they are from teachers or coaches, but not always. They are definitely from peers and friends. And they are definitely found in the media and music and movies that we watch. So these are kind of the boiled down man box rules that pretty much all men that I've talked to have learned some variation of this. So be tough, be aggressive, don't back down, compete, win at all costs. There is be self-reliant, don't ask for help. There is don't be feminine, and don't be homosexual. And then the big one, or one of the big ones, is be stoic, or don't feel. And the thing that amazes me about this is I've talked to men throughout the world, on most of the continents, most religions, and most will agree with some variation of this. And even in, like, I remember talking to someone in India recently, and I was telling him about the don't be feminine, don't be gay rules, and he said, well, we have different words, but the meanings are the same. Now, the interesting thing is these don't take place in areas where natural resources are plentiful and there's no neighbor that is a threat to invade. So like the Polynesian island of Tahiti, these don't exist in the same way. There's a tripolar spectrum of gender. So it goes from masculine to feminine, but there's also this third option. And men and women are both equally likely to go to that, and they're welcome to. So, you know, we can debate the good and bad of those rules. To me, they're kind of a mixed bag. And I started thinking about them on a 1 to 10 scale. And if you look at just self-reliance, or be self-reliant as an example, and put that on a 1 to 10 scale, where 1 is I'm completely dependent for every need that I have. And 10 is I'm totally self-reliant. You can see pretty quickly how either extreme is a problem. I don't want to be completely dependent on everyone, and I don't want to be totally self-reliant, because I remember I had my best friend's dad growing up was such a tough guy that he would pull his own rotting teeth out in the garage with pliers. That's self-reliant. But that's not how I want to be. The other thing to keep in mind here is that I'm talking about gender. And gender exists on a spectrum from masculine to feminine. I'm not talking about sex here. Sex is the spectrum from male to female. So if you look at my mom, you can have a very masculine female. She, by the way, prides herself on that. You can also have a very feminine male and anything in between. So some women will say, well, a lot of this applies to me. Okay, fine. And I've talked to a lot of women in business that have had to adapt or adopt a lot of the masculine traits in order to succeed in business. So the biggest problem in my mind is be stoic, don't feel. And forgive me for the language I'm going to use here, but I think it's necessary for you to understand what happens when we're younger. And the men in the room have probably already experienced this, but when boys in public, usually around their friends or peers, when they show too much sadness or fear, they will get one of three classic insults. Stop being a pussy, don't be a bitch, or don't be a little girl. Now there's other insults that they can get, but understand that those three insults are the epitome of the feminine. And so the rule there is don't be like a girl. And I think what happens is we get this a few times, and I think it could be as few as 2 or 3, and we go, wow, that hurts, that's embarrassing, I don't like that, because no man I've ever met wants to be embarrassed. And so we jump back in the man box. On the other side, if we show too much joy, love, happiness, excitement, flamboyance, God forbid, we get, don't be so gay, don't be a fag. Again, I apologize for the insults. I don't condone any of them, but every man I've talked to has gotten some form of this. So again, when we get that, we jump back in the man box. And here's the question. What are we left with that we can safely display in public? And how does it impact us? Because I would say there's 3 emotions that we are left with. The first one is stress, because if I tell you, oh my God, I am so stressed, it implies that I'm busy and important somehow, so that's safe. Lust is a big one. Oh, look at that ass in those jeans. Again, I apologize, I'm not trying to perpetuate this, I'm just trying to talk about it. It's an explanation, not an excuse. But the third one, the big one to me, is anger. That there is some degree of anger that we are safe demonstrating, irritability, frustration, annoyance, rage. And most of our emotions get funneled into that anger lens. And by the way, if you guys want these slides, I'm more than happy to share them with you. So anger, just so you know, there's a big debate in the field about this. Is anger a primary emotion or secondary emotion? I don't think that really matters. I think it can be both. But if you think of anger as a secondary emotion, what does that mean? It means that anger comes quickly on the heels of another emotion. And by quickly, I mean 1/3 of a second quick. So we're not typically aware of that first emotion that comes along, but it can be anxiety, depression, embarrassment's a huge one, guilt or shame, and there's some others as well. So, okay, most of our emotions, if you get angry at me, sir, I'm going to start defending my position. I'm going to start explaining to you what I did or what I was thinking, or I could attack back. But then there's also this really damning dynamic of externalization of blame. What does that mean? It means that when I'm really angry, nothing is my fault. Everything is someone else's fault. You can imagine how this impacts our growth as humans. But the typical thinking is, if you would just stop being such a fill in the blank, I'd be fine. So there's no onus, there's no responsibility on it for me. So when we're angry, it's addictive, it's empowering, it's energizing. If you really think about it, and if you really kind of are honest with yourself, a lot of us like to be angry. Anger wants to keep itself alive. And it's always, what anger will do is it will hijack your eyeballs, and it will start to scan the environment for other things that keep you annoyed. So sorry, I've changed this since I sent this one, but the other thing that's big is anger shuts down learning and growth. And anger undermines the feelings of safety and respect. And that's kind of interesting to me in the work world, in that Google came out with a study a few years ago looking at the most effective traits of teams. And the #1 trait was a feeling of psychological safety. What undermines psychological safety more than anything else? I would say it's some degree of anger, which includes disappointment, resentment, manipulation, and so on. So it made me start thinking, okay, what's underneath this anger? And we know that there's a difference between female depression and male depression. And the more I started to look at it, the more I realized there's a lot of overlap there with anger and the man box. So typical female depression is like depression as you would think of it, right? They're sad, they blame themselves for the problems, their own problems. And male depression, if you look at this, blames others for problems, irritable and impatient, suspicious and guarded, attacks when feeling hurt, overreacts, then feels sorry later, feelings are blunted or numb. Almost every one of those has to do with anger or irritability. And the last one there has to do with alexithymia, which literally translates to no words for feelings. And, you know, for some of us, this is not unlike being a toddler. You know, when you have a toddler and they scream because they have some unmet need, they don't have words that they can put on it. And so what do we say to a toddler? Use your words. And one of the things I'm going to come back to in this is this idea of emotional granularity, the importance, the need of expanding our emotional vocabulary so that we can put the right word on what we're feeling, our internal experience, so that we're not throwing a tantrum like a toddler. So in my opinion, this male depression fuels male anger. So what are the impact on relationships? Because in positive psychology, we found that relationships are a key foundational pillar of a happy, thriving life. And yet, I would argue that we men are not socialized in the direction of relationship. We're socialized in the direction of competition. And women, on the other hand, I think in general, are socialized more in the direction of competition, of relationship, communication, emotional awareness. We, on the other hand, are often mocked for dipping our toe in that water. So this socialization process negatively impacts our ability to connect with other people. And it's due to this limited emotional awareness. We're not really encouraged to communicate well or stay in uncomfortable conversations, and due to our irritability. And what we have now, and what the research is showing, is that we've got an epidemic of lonely, disconnected men. And you heard some of the stats earlier, that life expectancy in the US is 5 years less for men. Men are 3.5 times as likely to die by suicide, more likely to abuse drugs and alcohol, but, well, half as likely to seek out mental health compared to women. But these other ones I really like. The 43% of men say that they have to hide their true selves at work. And I can make an argument that that's way, way higher than 43%, simply because of a lack of self-awareness. But this last one cracks me up and pains me at the same time. 67% of men would rather shock themselves than be alone for 5 or 10 minutes with their own thoughts. 2/3. And I think part of that kind of goes back to this quote from Anne Lamott that, to paraphrase, my mind is like a scary neighborhood that I'm afraid to go alone. 67%. So what I see in my practice is a large influx of pre-divorce couples. And so in doing some research on that, I found that the wives are responsible for initiating 75% of the divorces in the United States right now. And the biggest complaint I hear is, I can't connect with my partner. And that makes complete sense to me. And here's the thing I want you to take away from this. This is not the fault of men. In other words, we didn't ask to be socialized in this manner. It just kind of happens. And I think it's society's effort to make soldiers and to protect itself. And again, I have no problem with soldiers or police or fire. I work with a lot of them. I'm grateful for what they do. I'm not saying we need to get rid of that side of masculinity. What I'm saying is we need to discover ways, to learn ways to be able to shift gears. So just as a quick example, if you're a man and you're going to go out and play rugby, fine. Be traditionally masculine. Adhere to those man box rules. That works. However, if after the rugby game you're going to go out on date night with your spouse, you need a different side of yourself. You need to be able to access different pieces, different gears. You need to be better at communication. You need to be more vulnerable. You need to be more emotionally aware. And then if you go home and your 2-year-old daughter falls down and skins her knee, you need a different set of gears. So you need to be soft and quiet and compassionate and nurturing and helpful. So what I'm arguing for here is really the ability to access all of the emotion, the full spectrum of masculinity. So while it's not the fault of men, I would argue it is our responsibility to evolve beyond this man box. So what areas do we need to evolve? To me, number one, I would say, is self-awareness. There's recent research by Tasha Eurich that 95% of us will report being highly self-aware. And her research has found that it's only about 10 to 15% that actually are aware. So understand that we are creatures of habit, we are often mindless, and our self-awareness isn't really as high as we think it is. But if you don't have the self-awareness, if you're not aware there's a problem, nothing will change. Second, we need to increase that emotional granularity, that emotional vocabulary. There's research that shows that men can name about 8 emotions. Women, it's about 17. That alone was enough to spark the competitive fire in me to begin learning some more emotion words. But the other thing is, Brene Brown has done research that shows that we can only name about 3 emotions in our body in the moment: happy, sad, mad. That's not a whole lot better than a 5-year-old. So we need to work on that because words are powerful. We know from studies at UCLA that simply putting the right emotional label on our internal experience turns down the intensity of that emotion. And how can you communicate with your loved one what you're feeling if you don't have a word for it? And there's a lot to this. I mean, do you know the difference between an emotion and a mood? Do you know the difference between guilt and shame? And it goes on and on and on, but there's some really powerful ideas here that need to be shared. Third, give yourself permission to feel whatever it is you're feeling. And there's a great saying in mindfulness: allow whatever is arising to arise without judgment. Without judgment phrase, that'll take you years. I'm still working on that. Because what normally happens is, let's say I get angry at my daughter and yell at her. And then I wait a little bit, I'm like, oh man, that was a little too much. And then I feel guilty for yelling at her. And then I feel ashamed for losing my temper. And then I get angry at myself for getting angry at her. You see where it's an emotional spiral, right? And so if we can accept what we're feeling, and there's a whole bunch of anger management stuff that I can't get into today, but if you can accept what you're feeling and speak to it early, you're way better off. So the other one that I've seen in the men that I work with is I really urge them to be quick and easy to laugh and smile. I think we take ourselves way too seriously. And the other piece of this is, and the reason I love the positive psychology piece, is I can teach my clients about positive emotions. And I can teach people to turn down the volume on anger or depression or anxiety. But my belief is that we need something to put in the place of those emotions because nature abhors a vacuum. And we're not trying to eliminate any of those emotions, we're just trying to reduce them. But I think that what we need to put in their place are positive emotions like gratitude, awe, joy, love, laughter, amusement. There's a bunch of them. And they add so much to our life, but if we're not aware enough to realize that we are in the midst of a positive emotion, it doesn't do much for us. Let me just ask you a question. No one needs to answer, but how good are you at receiving a compliment? Because every man I've ever spoken to is terrible at it, including myself. I really had to work to receive a compliment. But I think of all the ways you discount a compliment. They're not telling me the truth. They're blowing smoke up my rear. They don't really mean that. They're trying to get something out of me. And yet, other people can often see our positive qualities far more clearly than we can. So wouldn't it behoove us to maybe trust their sincerity? Anyway, that's a tangent. So, and I think the fifth one is that we need to begin to deal with that male depression and that male anger, however you can do that. Because imagine this, imagine living in a world where the vast majority of men were highly self-aware, where they had great emotional management skills, where they were quick and easy to laugh and smile, and where depression and anger weren't that prevalent. Because that's a world that I would sign up for right now. All right, here's some quick tools to try out just to get you going on your journey. So to begin dismantling anger, one of the things you can do is ask yourself, what other emotions might be beneath my irritation? And there's a bunch. Embarrassment's a classic. For me, the biggest one that I've experienced is hurt. My feelings are hurt. And so now when I start to get angry, I'm just like, did someone hurt my feelings? The second one is look at your world beliefs. And this is really powerful research coming out of University of Pennsylvania from Jer Clifton. And he's divided the world up into, I think it's 26 world beliefs. Things like the world, to what extent do you see the world as safe versus dangerous? To what extent do you see the world as alive versus mechanistic? And this is fascinating to me because what they found in the first few years of research is that these beliefs seem to underlie and inform all of our thoughts, feelings, and actions. That's really powerful. And for instance, well, let me go a step further. So I believe that you can break these world beliefs down into 3 layers. So there's beliefs that we have about the world at large, there's beliefs we have about people in general, and then there's beliefs about self. And I remember I asked a client once, so, if you think about people in general, what percentage of them would you say are generally trustworthy? From 1 to 100. And he thought about it for a bit and he said, I don't know, 20%. And I said, wow, that's interesting because I would say it's 85, 90%. Now consider that for a second. We live in the same world, and yet we don't. Because he lives in a world based on that belief where only 20%, 2 out of 10 people can be trusted. I live in a world where 9 out of 10 can be trusted. So there's some real merit to these world beliefs and just beginning to consider what are my world beliefs. And then the other one that I really like because it's so simple is ask yourself several times a day, what am I feeling right now? And again, this is based on research. And the beautiful thing about this is you don't even have to come up with an answer to the question. All you have to do is pause and ask yourself, what am I doing? Why? Well, what we're doing there is building a critical skill called metacognition. And you may have heard of this, but metacognition is thinking about thinking. And this is a common trait in every successful executive. So the more that you can do exercises like this, the more you build your metacognition, the more you build your attentional control, the better things get. And then finally, I would suggest be curious, be brave, be open to learning more about your internal landscape. And let me end with another brief story. So 20 years ago, I was presenting at a continuation high school. This was a high school where students had failed out of traditional high schools for any variety of reasons, and drug abuse or falling behind on credits or pregnancy or whatever. And it was funny because when I would go and present there, like a third of the students would be stoned and most would have one earbud in, and they really were not very keen on school. And I would come in once a month and present, and they seemed to like it. So anyway, I was going to present one day, and I'm walking to the office, and the principal's talking to me. And as I'm walking to the room where I'm presenting, so I'm kind of focused on what I'm presenting, she's telling me about a new student that they had in this school of about 100 students. And she said, yeah, we got this new African-American female. She's 16. She lives in a group home. She's been really tough. Like, no one's really been able to connect with her. And I'm kind of thinking to myself, why are you telling me this? Like, I'm presenting to the whole school. Well, I found out why in just a few minutes. So I start my presentation on positive psychology, and I'm 2 sentences into my presentation, and this young black lady stands up and she goes, I got a question. I'm black, I'm female, I'm young, I'm poor, I live in a group home, I don't have a family. Why should I listen to anything you have to say? Huh. So I thought, probably as quickly as I've ever thought in my life, and I knew that if I challenged her, I'd lose her. So here's what I said. I said, you know what? You're absolutely right. I'm bald, I'm middle-aged, I have a family, I live in a home. And on those levels, we're different. And on those levels, maybe you shouldn't listen to me. And here's what I can say. Anything you've ever felt in your life, fear, love, joy, anger, rage, hatred, gratitude, awe, you name it, I've felt it too. And I've been studying these emotions for about 20, 30 years, and I'm here today to share some tools with you that you can use. The tools are free. Give them a try. If they work for you, great. If they don't, you haven't lost anything. And with that, I rolled back in my presentation. And I don't know, I can't say what changed for her or what changed her, but you know, there's great teachers at that school, there's a great principal, but within a couple of weeks, something major shifted in her. She started coming to school on time. She started getting her work in. About 6 months later, she joined student leadership. And in a year and a half, she was the commencement speaker for the high school. No one thought this girl would go to college. She ended up going to Sacramento State. So the thing is, to me, it's not about proving how I'm unique or special. It's about finding ways to build bridges, to connect, to discover how we're similar across gender, race, culture, language, whatever it is. It's about building connection. And I think it's also about, you know, realizing that we are large enough to contain multitudes within us, that we contain paradoxes. And that's just being human. Things like, I need novelty and I need certainty. Things like, I am part of a tribe and I am individual. Things like, I'm a man, I'm tough, and I feel. So, just in wrapping up, I think this is a key part of men learning to become happier, more connected, prioritizing their relationships more. And we need these things like greater self-awareness, greater emotional granularity, greater connectedness, because I think that leads to a better world. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. My time is up.